You don't know what this means, neither do I. It's obviously a matter for the police to handle. Is that clear?
It's clear Dr. Edelman killed my brother.
Welcome to today's show. My name is John. As always, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, or follow the links to social media in the podcast show notes. So please subscribe when you're finished listening. You can also go to classicmovierev.com to read notes, bios, and other random movie thoughts. Today's movie is House of Dracula, 1945. It is said to be a sequel of House of Frankenstein, 1944, but it's more like a rehash. The movie is rated 5.8 on imdb.com and has 56% on the tomato meter and 29% audience approval in RottenTomatoes.com. I'm going to have to say these ratings are about right. I could not find a contemporary review of this film from a major newspaper, but I do have some ideas. I have always empathized with the pain that Larry Talbot, Lon Chaney Jr., carries as the Wolfman. I think John Carradine is the second best Dracula ever. So I'm going to enjoy this movie, no matter how good or bad it is. The website machinemean.org makes a good case for the monsters changing and no longer being invaders, as this was the first major classic horror film released after the end of World War II. This seems to be right on point, as we quickly changed our fears to invaders from outer space and mutated atomic monsters. As for the castle/doctor's office for both this movie and House of Frankenstein 1944, I want to know who the real estate listing agent was. In the early movie, Dr. Gustav Niemann, Boris Karloff, and his hunchback, Daniel J. Carroll Nash, ran the medical facility. When Niemann was killed by the Frankenstein monster, I assumed the castle went on the market. Did it list Dank Castle with complete medical facilities? Suited for the greatest doctor ever? A tendency towards madness is a plus. The new owner, Dr. Frank Edelman, Onslow Stevens, is a pretty fantastic doctor. But I'm more interested in how he advertises. Is he a search engine optimization master? He must have an amazing Twitter following to have Dracula and the Wolfman show up at his house within 24 hours of each other. Dr. Edelman was not very curious, however. You don't want the first time seeing your castle basement to be when Dracula shows you his coffin down there. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Lon Chaney Jr. played Lawrence or Larry Talbot, the Wolfman. Chaney was first covered way back in episode 5 of Mice and Men 1939. John Carradine, of course, was Count Dracula. Carradine was first covered in episode 12, Billy the Kid vs. Dracula, 1966. Lionel Atwell, again not surprisingly, played Police Inspector Holtz. Atwell's interesting life was covered in episode 9, Son of Frankenstein, 1939. Glenn Strange played Frankenstein's monster. Strange was briefly covered in episode 76, House of Frankenstein, 1944. Boris Karloff was in the movie through the use of archival footage. He appeared during the dream sequence. Karloff was covered in episode 7, Bride of Frankenstein, 1935. Martha O'Driscoll played nurse Melissa Morrell. She was born in Oklahoma in 1922. As a child, lovely Martha modeled and studied singing and dance. She began working in theater in Phoenix, Arizona. From this, in 1935, she began doing uncredited parts in movie musicals. Martha started modeling for Max Factor, R.C. Cola, and other companies. Her first uncredited film was made in 1936 when she was only 13 years old. Martha had a 12-year career which included Little Abner 1940, Harry Aldrich for President 1941, Odors Like Under Western Skies and Down Missouri Way 1946, classic horror such as House of Dracula 1945, and film noir like Blonde Alibi 1946. Her final film was Carnegie Hall 1947. She was briefly married to a naval officer but divorced after less than a year. Her second marriage was done the correct way. She married Arthur Appleton, who was so wealthy that he was retired by age 25. After leaving the film business, Martha and her husband moved to Ocala, Florida, where they raised thoroughbred horses. Martha died in 1998. Onslow Stevens played the amazing Dr. Franz Edelman. Stevens was born in 1902 in California. He was the son of actor Housley Stevenson, who played the plastic surgeon that taunted Humphrey Bogart with the possibility of looking like a bulldog in Dark Passage 1947. Because most of the family were actors, Stevens was on the stage by age 3. Stevens joined the Army right out of high school. But after that, it seems he spent most of his life at Pasadena Playhouse collecting wives for a total of 5. He was a devoted nudist and spoke on the subject of the medical values to those that would listen. Must have been fun to hang around. Stevens was primarily a stage actor. He worked a lot on television and had a decent movie career. His first uncredited film role was in The Gay Diplomat, 1932. He was credited in Radio Patrol, 1932. His best-known movies include Life Returns, 1935, 3 on the Trail, 1936, House of Dracula, 1945, Canyon Passage, 1946, film noirs The San Francisco Story, 1952, and New York Confidential, 1955, the great sci-fi Them, 1954, and a small bit in The Buccaneer, 1958. In later life, he suffered from alcoholism and bipolar disorder. This and the shock treatments he took hurt his ability to act. In November 1976, while in a nursing home, Stevens broke his hip as a result of a push from another patient. He never recovered and died of pneumonia in January 1977. Charges were brought, but later dropped. Jane Addams played Nina, the hunchback nurse. Addams was born in 1918 in Texas. She was an accomplished violinist and was offered a scholarship to Juilliard. Instead, she spent 4 years studying at the Pasadena Playhouse. She began working on syndicated radio shows. Addams also worked as a model, where she picked up the nickname Pony. She was briefly married to a Navy pilot that was killed in World War II. Her first credited film was Salome Where She Danced, 1945. That same year, House of Dracula, 1945, was released and remains her best-known role. She appeared in crime movies like The Brute Man, 1946. An advanced horse rider, she was in a lot of westerns such as Gun Law Justice, 1949. Addams was in Masterminds, 1949, and Batman and Robin, 1949. She married Tom Turnage near the end of World War II and shortly retired from acting. When he was sent to the Korean conflict, she worked briefly in television. Addams' husband worked for the Reagan administration. She died in 2014. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
A bat flies to the second floor of a house. The bat transforms into Count Dracula, John Carradine, and checks out a sleeping woman in a bed for a bit. He then goes downstairs and enters the house. Dr. Franz Edelman, Onslow Stevens, of Visaria, is asleep in a chair. His cat takes exception to the vampire entering the house. Dracula uses his unholy powers to chase the cat from the room. He could have just tried to pick it up and it would have had the same effect.
What are you doing here? Who are you? I am Baron Lothos. I have come to you for help. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. I must apologize for the intrusion, but travel for me is very difficult, and I've come a long way. I don't understand. Perhaps you will after you've led me to the basement room of this castle.
When Doc Edelman wakes, he is shocked to see a man standing over him. Count Dracula introduces himself as Baron Lothos. That is quite a social demotion from Count to Baron, as Baron is the lowest of the royal titles. Dracula asks for help from the doctor. Dracula then asks to be taken to the basement of the castle. The doc is skeptical, but he takes Dracula down anyway. Dracula asks the doc if he believes in vampires, supernatural, and eternal life. Dracula has already moved his trusty coffin into the basement. The coffin has Dracula's crest, and he admits to the skeptical doctor that he is in fact Dracula. Dracula explains that he has native soil in his coffin. The doc has a history of helping special cases. That day, Doc goes into the lab where his nurse, Nina, Jane Addams, is working on samples. He tells her to make a blood smear of Count Dracula's blood. When she gets up, she has a bad hump on her back. I can fix that hump. What hump? The doc tells her that she will be the first to benefit from their research.
Good morning, Nina.
Good morning, Doctor.
Make a blood smear of this for me, will you, please?
The spores are multiplying faster than ever.
Yes, we're making progress, all right.
The operation on your honest leg proves that. If we can produce the mold in quantity, think what it will mean to thousands of people all over the world.
We'll succeed, Nina. When we do, your devotion to this experiment will be rewarded. You'll be the first to benefit by it.
When the doc looks at the blood smear, he sees some type of parasite. He tells the nurse to make an antitoxin. When the sun sets, Dracula rises for his doctor's appointment. They charge you $25 if you miss an appointment. Dracula knocks on the front door and Nina lets him in. The other nurse, Melissa Morrell, Martha O'Driscoll, knows Baron Latos from another town. The doc says he thinks the antitoxin will work well when given through a series of transfusions.
It appears that I may have to alter my theories. An examination of your blood reveals the presence of a peculiar parasite, a form with which I'm completely unfamiliar.
Dracula will stay in the basement while he undergoes the treatment. In the waiting room is Larry Talbot, Lon Chaney Jr., a.k.a. the Wolfman, and he's trying to see the doctor. Talbot says he can't wait another hour because there isn't time.
How long will the doctor be busy?
Some little time, I'm afraid.
I must see him at once. I've come a long way. If you'll just give him my name. Talbot. Lawrence Talbot. Maybe he'll understand.
I can't interrupt the doctor now. He's giving a transfusion.
How long will that take?
An hour? Maybe longer. I'm sorry. You'll just have to wait.
I can't wait. There isn't time.
The doc is giving direct transfusions from himself to Dracula as Nina assists. Dracula really wants to bite Nurse Morrell. After the transfusion, she tells the doctor of Larry Talbot's visit, and the doctor gets a phone call from the police inspector asking him to come down. He takes Nurse Morrell along. Police Inspector Holt, Lionel Atwell, tries to disperse the crowd in the most unpleasant tone possible.
Go to your homes, all of you. This is no concern of yours.
We don't have to go home. We know our rights.
That goes for you too, Steinmull. Whenever there's trouble, you're always in the front line.
The doc and the nurse arrive and are led into the station. Talbot has asked Holtz to lock him in a cell. Larry asks the doc about the pentagram and a man turning into a beast. The doc tells him there's no such thing as a werewolf. Just then, the moon comes out from behind a cloud and Larry transforms into the wolf man right before their eyes. The doc decides to take the case. He asks Holtz to bring him to the castle in the morning. Nurse Morrell comes to take the sulking Talbot to see the doc. Edelman has found several places where Talbot's skull is pressing against his brain. He then says when Talbot thinks he is turning into a werewolf, certain glands overproduce, making him turn into a wolfman. The project that Doc and Nina have been working on involves growing mold that softens bones. The doc thinks he can fix Talbot using the mold to reshape his skull. It will take a month for the mold to be ready, and Talbot doesn't want to transform again. He runs and jumps off a cliff into the sea, hoping to kill himself. The doc says there are caves below the cliff and Talbot may be alive. The two nurses wait on the top of the cliff that night. The doc has men build a device so he can be lowered to the caves below. He hopes to time his arrival with Talbot's de-wolfing. Talbot is still the Wolfman and attacks the doctor. But the moon sets just in time and he turns back into a human. As they get ready to go up, the doc realizes that the cave they're in would be the perfect place to grow the mold-producing plants. Just then they see the Frankenstein monster, Glenn Strange, and the skeleton of Dr. Nyman, who was played by Boris Karloff in House of Frankenstein 1944. The monster's hand is moving. Talbot gets more excited about finding a secret way into the castle than he was about finding the monster.
The temperature and humidity down here are ideal for growing the spore-producing plants. Before the next full moon, we should have more than enough to help.
The Frankenstein monster.
That must be the skeleton of Dr. Nyman. Revitalized him years ago. As the story goes, the villagers drove them into the swamp. They went down in the quicksand. For all these years, the mud has brought them here.
Still alive.
He's indestructible. Frankenstein's creation, is man's challenge to the laws of life and death.
Doctor! Dr. Edelman! Look here. There must be a way out of here into the castle.
History mentions an old torture chamber.
They get busy moving the plants into the cave. The doc is really impressed by the monster. He wants to bring the monster back to full life. He is warned by Talbot and Nina that it is a monster and it killed its last doctor. The doc starts sending electricity to the monster.
Think what you're doing, Doctor. To bring him back again, Doctor, would unleash worse than murder upon humanity.
That helpless body is man's responsibility.
Man's responsibility is to his fellow man.
But Nina finally talks him out of it. One night, Dracula comes in and Nurse Morell is wearing an evening gown and playing the piano. Dracula gets all excited and out of control. He uses his mind power on her. She starts playing crazy music and sees life as an undead. Nurse Morell pulls out a cross that she has around her neck and the music returns to normal. Dracula turns away. He tries to force her back into a trance, but she gets his injection ready. The doc walks in and sends Morell away. The doc tells Dracula that a different species of antibiotics is forming. Later, Morell is working, but she is still suffering from the trance. She almost falls off the stairs, and Nina is very worried about her. She follows Morell upstairs and finds her with Dracula. Nina sees that Dracula doesn't have a reflection in the mirror. Dracula leaves with Morell while Nina goes to warn the doc. Dracula is trying to get Morell to take off the cross. The doc runs to the garden, but not before saying that if anything happens to him, for her to burn what's in the basement. Dracula sends Morell away, and the doc prepares for a new transfusion with the help of Nina. It's too soon for the doc to do another transfusion, and he passes out. Dracula uses his mind power to knock out Nina. He then switches the flow of the transfusion, sending his blood into the doctor. Dracula escapes, and Nina wakes up sometime later. She wakes the doc. Dracula is outside and turns into a bat. He flies to Nurse Morell's room. Nina wakes up the brooding Talbot. Dracula transforms into human form, and Morell is ready to go. The doc uses a crucifix to stop Dracula. Talbot runs in with Nina and helps Morell. Dracula runs to his coffin as it is almost sunrise. The doc pulls the coffin into the sunlight and opens the lid. Dracula turns to bones. Morell is released from Dracula's spell. The doc tells Nina that he has killed Dracula. The doc is coming under the vampire's spell from the blood of Dracula. The cat runs away, and he sees he is dying. At night, he sees visions of Dracula and himself as undead. His evil self wants to use the monster as a weapon. The doc is running out of time. His evil side goes to work on the monster, giving it more power. He is trying to save his own life. The circuits blow and he cannot completely revive the monster. The doc finds out from Nina that there is only enough mold to fix Nina's hump or Talbot's werewolfing. She nobly lets Talbot go first.
How much of the spore concentrate have we ready?
Don't worry about that now. We're making fine progress.
Answer me. Is it enough for 2 operations?
No, there won't be for some time.
But we do have enough for 1.
I think so.
Then I must operate as soon as possible. On you.
But Doctor...
You were right, Nina. I am ill. It's impossible to know what the future holds. I'll operate tomorrow, Nina.
Then you must operate on Mr. Talbot. The moon will be full in a few days. We can't let him suffer again.
But you've waited such a long time.
Then I can wait a little longer.
Nina and Morell continue to work on the mold. The doctor uses the mold to fix the skull of Talbot. Morell is very concerned about Talbot. After the surgery, they continue working on the mold for Nina. Nurse Morell tries to put the hooks in Talbot. He is skeptical because he kills everyone he loves, so... That night, the doc is getting a little weird. Talbot is in a wheelchair and watches the doc get on a cart. He later kills the cart driver. The villagers form a mob and head back to the castle because they think Talbot is the killer. Inspector Holtz checks the body, and then he and the mob go to the castle to find the murderer.
His throat was torn open as though by some enraged animal.
So naturally you suspect me.
I have good reason to.
Holt sees that Talbot is in a wheelchair, so he can't be the murderer. The police leave without a killer. Talbot goes and tells the doc he saw what happened. The doc wants Talbot to stay quiet until he can help Nina. The villagers are riled up because they found a medical tag in the hand of the murdered cart driver.
Dr. Franz Edelman, Bonn University, Cum Laude.
What's going on here?
I was just on my way over to your office, Inspector. I want you to take a look at this. I found it clenched in Siegfried's left hand.
Dr. Edelman killed him.
Be quiet, Steinmüller. You don't know what this means, neither do I. It's obviously a matter for the police to handle. Is that clear?
It's clear Dr. Edelman killed my brother.
The police go to the castle just ahead of the village mob. The doc and the two nurses wait for Talbot as the full moon rises to see if he changes to a werewolf. Is that the best plan? Could they have him in a cage or chains or something? The moon comes up and there is no effect on Talbot. He's cured! Morel runs and embraces him. The doc has disappeared and Nina goes looking for him. She finds him in the laboratory electrifying the monster. It is halfway up when Nina speaks. The doc in his Dracula rage closes in on Nina. The police come in the front door just in time to see the doc strangle Nina. He throws Inspector Holtz into the electrical panel and kills him. Talbot has a gun and the doc comes towards him. Talbot fires a couple of shots, killing the doc. The village mob makes it to the front door. When he sees his creator dead, the monster attacks Talbot. The monster starts a fire while destroying the lab.
Get out! The Frankenstein monster! Get out!
The fire kills the monster. Yeah, right. Morel and Talbot walk away in the moonlight and live happily ever after. What kind of ending is this? Nina worked hard and she gets killed? While the hussy that was running around with Dracula is now with the former Wolfman? World famous short summary, no good deed goes unpunished. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I really appreciate you spending the time listening. You can find connections to social media and email on my site at classicmovierev.com. There are links in the podcast show notes as well. Remember, this show is completely free and independent. All I ask is that you jump over to Apple Podcasts and give me a review. It really helps the show get found. Beware the Moors.